Mr. President.
Senator from Rhode Island.
President, may I ask unanimous consent that any pending quorum call be vitiated?
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's nice to see the distinguished senator in the chair presiding. I'm not sure in my 183 time to wake up speeches I've yet had the pleasure of speaking while the senator is presiding. I'm here to once again call for us to wake up to the corporate capture of Congress and this administration, the capture of governance by the fossil fuel industry that keeps us from honestly addressing climate change. There is a saying that personnel is policy. Personnel is policy. Well, the Trump personnel for positions at the Environmental Protection Agency reflect a policy to undo the public welfare mission of the agency and align it with the special interests of the fossil fuel industry. There is a word for that. It is called corruption, at least as the founding fathers knew the meaning of that term. It starts at the top. Trump named Scott Pruitt head of the EPA. Pruitt has a long record of dark money fundraising and long, cozy relationships with big energy industry political donors. In effect, he is a tentacle of the fossil fuel climate denial operation, wiggling and wriggling in the administrator's chair. Near his new $25,000 cone of silence secret communications booth that he built so no one would hear him checking in with his masters. Results are as expected. The New York Times has reported how rollbacks at Scott Pruitt's EPA are a boon to oil and gas. No surprise. In the 4 months that followed his appointment, Pruitt moved to undo, delay, or otherwise block more than 30 environmental rules benefiting his fossil fuel friends. This regulatory rollback, larger in scope than any over so short a time in the agency's near half-century history, went straight into the pockets of the fossil fuel industry. Longtime Pruitt benefactor Devon Energy is cashing in dividends on its investment in Scott Pruitt's political career, as Pruitt is working to eliminate rules on the leaking and flaring of methane and has rescinded requirements for reporting methane emissions. Devon, as you may recall, is that company whose letter to the EPA Pruitt put on his own Oklahoma Attorney General letterhead to mask Devon's hand and submit their work as his own official work as Attorney General of his state. So this hand-in-glove relationship between Devon as the hand and Pruitt as the glove goes back a long way. The EPA has career scientists and legal experts who bring decades of experience in environmental law and science to the EPA, who are all being cut out as the administrator takes drastic steps to undo environmental protections. Just this week, EPA scientists were yanked from a conference in Rhode Island where they were going to talk about climate change. The matter of climate change and on Narragansett Bay in Rhode Island is pretty significant. This is the day's Providence Journal, our leading newspaper in Rhode Island. Headline, "Will Climate Change Negate Bay Cleanup?" with a big map of Narragansett Bay, all the facilities at risk of being flooded and overwhelmed. It is front page news. It is a matter of extreme importance in Rhode Island, and EPA yanked out its scientists. They weren't allowed to come down and talk at an event where they were going to talk about climate change. And it's not just yanking the scientists. Here's a New York Times article by Lisa Friedman from October 20th. Headline, EPA scrubs a climate website of, quote, climate change, close quote. An EPA website has been scrubbed of scores of links. About 15 mentions of the words climate change have been removed from the main page alone. And it's not just at EPA. Here's today's exclusive. Quote, headline, the Interior Department scrubs climate change from its strategic plan. I mean, they act as if this is the Soviet Union, and the government is allowed to tell scientists what they can say and not say, and to put phony propaganda onto official websites, and to keep scientists from going to meetings because they might actually tell the truth about climate change. Mr. President, I am the son and grandson of Foreign Service officers. I grew up serving in countries that did that, where the government could tell the scientists, no, you don't say that, no, you don't go there, no, this is the party line. I never thought that would happen in the United States of America. And here we are. To aid Pruitt in his fossil fuel industry crusade, our president has nominated a parade of fossil fuel lackeys, lobbyists, and operatives whose main qualification seems to be allegiance to their corporate clients and benefactors. And it's not just the fossil fuel industry that gets their hacks planted in government offices. You remember in the Cat in the Hat, they had Thing 1 and Thing 2 running around? Well, let's look at Hack 1 and Hack 2, who just cleared committee today in the Pruitt EPA for sale roster. Hack 1 is a toxicologist who consults for major chemical corporations and has spent the better part of his professional life fighting regulation of potentially toxic compounds in consumer goods. His name is Michael Dorson. President Trump nominated him to run the EPA Office of Chemical Safety and Pollution Prevention, a lobbying group for sellers of pesticides, fungicides, and rodenticides. Called Dorson a perfect fit for the job, the perfect industry hack for that job, more like. Hack 2 is William Wareham, nominated to run the EPA Office of Air and Radiation. Wareham is a lobbyist who has represented a host of major industrial and energy corporations, and the Rubber Manufacturers Association, the American Forest and Paper Association, and the American Petroleum Institute. President George W. Bush actually nominated this guy to the same post in 2006, but the White House withdrew his nomination because it was so controversial. Well, that was 2006. That was before Citizens United. That was before that decision amped up industry power to the point where it can now ram through conflicted and objectionable candidates with, as happened this morning, unanimous Republican support. Not one Republican senator on the committee would voice an objection. When senators asked questions for the record in the Environment and Public Works Committee nomination hearing on Wareham and Dorson, these captured nominees played dumb about the central issues and programs they'll oversee if confirmed. I asked Dorson, for instance, if he agreed that, quote, the tobacco industry manipulated and obfuscated scientific research into the dangers of smoking for decades, end quote. Dorson, who conducted scientific studies designed, reviewed, and paid for by the tobacco industry, and whose name is all over in hundreds of places, the discovery records of the tobacco industry's denial operation, replied, "I do not have firsthand knowledge to comment." I do not have firsthand knowledge to comment. The president's selection to run the office that protects Americans from dangerous chemicals doesn't know the tobacco industry's history of falsifying science? Please, he worked for them. He was part of it. Remember, by the way, that the tobacco industry was taken to court by the United States Department of Justice back when the Department of Justice would take an industry to court. And the Department of Justice won a judgment declaring that tobacco had engaged in a fraud conspiracy to deny tobacco's harms. Dorson sees no evil. He knows nothing. I asked him whether he believes that hydrofluorocarbons are greenhouse gases and about the global warming potential of methane. His response, "I am not sufficiently familiar with the definition of greenhouse gases and do not have the expertise to answer these questions." Not familiar with the definition of greenhouse gases? This is basic high school science. Every one of us has a home state university that teaches this stuff. This has been science for more than 100 years. On to hack 2, Bill Wareham. When I asked Wareham about carbon dioxide's role in the observable effects of climate change, he replied, "The degree to which man-made greenhouse gas emissions are contributing to climate change has not been conclusively determined." This claim just doesn't match the scientific record, Mr. President. The EPA, the very agency to which Mr. Wareham is nominated, along with NOAA, states that, and I quote, "Carbon dioxide is the primary greenhouse gas that is contributing to recent climate change." Close quote. This consensus is held by published climate scientists, by scientific agencies and societies, by all of our national laboratories, and by universities in America and around the globe. As I said, every one of us in this room, every senator, I expect, haven't found an exception yet, and I've looked, has a home state university that doesn't just know this to be true, but it teaches it in its curriculum. But hack 2 sees no evil. He knows nothing. Wareham's disregard for well-established science provides a grim preview of what we can expect from him if confirmed. His predictable dodging falls in lockstep with Administrator Pruitt, who has stated he does not agree that carbon dioxide is a primary contributor to the global warming that we see. That puts him in a very small circle of people, I think, every one of whom is connected by money to the fossil fuel industry. I asked Mr. Wareham what he believes is a healthy standard for ozone. Now, bear in mind that one of the goals of the Clean Air Act is to set national ambient air quality standards for ozone. That the office to which he's nominated oversees this ozone standard, and that the EPA has had ozone standards in place since 1971, more than 45 years. In response to my question, Wareham answered, "I'm not familiar with the current science on the health effects of ozone, so I cannot comment on your question as to the appropriate level of the standard." Really? I asked Wareham whether he agreed with the EPA's 2009 finding that the current and projected concentrations of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere threaten the public health and welfare of current and future generations. Would he commit, I asked, not to narrow or weaken the EPA's endangerment finding? Wareham wrote back that he had not read the endangerment finding or the record prepared in support of the finding. Therefore, he said, I currently do not have a view. I currently do not have a view. That's funny. I bet he had a view when he was being paid by the Rubber Manufacturers Association, the American Forest and Paper Association, and the American Petroleum Institute. But I guess it was the miraculous evaporating view. Maybe these see no evil nominees, Dorsum and Wareham, don't know the basics of the problems they would confront. Maybe they just don't know. But let's not be fooled here. Polluters have paid these nominees well for their services over years. They were expert enough to be hired by industry groups as lobbyists and consultants. We know where their allegiances lie. We know who's been paying them. We know who they will serve. And, preview of coming attractions, coming up before the EPW committee soon is Andrew Wheeler, Trump's nominee for the EPA's second-in-command. Wheeler was a top lobbyist for the coal mining behemoth Murray Energy. Not only did this company support Trump's campaign and provide $300,000 to help pay for his inauguration, Murray Energy has also donated to Pruitt-affiliated political action committees to the tune of hundreds of thousands of dollars. I can't wait to hear his answers on the role of coal in climate change, childhood asthma, and mercury poisoning. The sad part of all of this is that the interests, the polluting interests who own these nominees also throw their weight around in Congress. So good luck getting an honest look at this mess through congressional oversight. Over and over, appalling nominees get through confirmation with no Republican dissent. More, see no evil. It's just wrong. For now, the American public will pay the price of dismantling these regulatory safeguards. They'll pay the price in poisonings and carcinogen exposures, in rising seas and raging wildfires, in childhood asthma and northbound tropical diseases. But mark my words, one day there will be a reckoning for all of this. When captured EPA officials put payback to their donors first, and clean air and public health a way distant second, it stinks. It is crooked by any reasonable definition of the term. It is corrupt in exactly the way the Founding Fathers understood corruption. The fossil fuel industry will one day be held to account for this binge of corruption and manipulation. ExxonMobil, Koch Industries, Arch Coal, Murray Coal, Peabody Coal, you own this just as much as the Republican Party does. I yield the floor.